Let me ask you something. What do you do when the player who carried your franchise on his back for half a decade might be walking out the door? What do you do when the guy who went from literally nobody knowing his name to becoming an NBA champion and an all-star and the face of your entire organization is suddenly at the center of trade rumors that will not go away no matter how much you want them to, because that is exactly where Raptors fans find themselves right now. And I know some of you are uncomfortable even clicking on a video with this title. I know some of you don't want to have this conversation, but we have to have it, because what is happening behind the scenes with Pascal Siakam and the Toronto Raptors is one of the most significant crossroads moments this franchise has faced since 2019. And if you want to understand what's really going on, not the surface level rumors, not the clickbait takes, but the actual full picture, then you need to watch this entire video. And if you are not already subscribed to this channel, do that right now. Seriously, hit that button, because when news breaks on this story, and trust me, it will break, we are going to be here covering every single detail. Let's get into it. To really understand what is happening right now with Pascal Siakam, you have to go back to the beginning, and I mean the very beginning, because his story is genuinely one of the most remarkable stories in the history of this franchise. We're talking about a kid who grew up in Cameroon, who didn't pick up a basketball until he was a teenager, who was an afterthought in the draft, who showed up to the NBA with raw tools and enormous question marks, and who turned himself through sheer obsessive work ethic and relentless improvement into something this city fell completely in love with. The Spicy P nickname wasn't just a catchy phrase. It was an identity. It was a representation of a player who had more flavor, more fire, more determination than anyone gave him credit for. And when the Raptors won the championship in 2019, yeah, Kawhi Leonard was the guy. Nobody is taking that away from him. But Pascal Siakam was the heartbeat of that team. He was the energy. He was the effort. He was the proof that the Raptors player development system was as good as anything in the league, and then Kawhi left. And the world waited to see who the Raptors were going to be without their superstar. And Pascal Siakam answered that question by stepping fully into the spotlight and becoming the unquestioned face of this franchise. He made all-star games, he improved his scoring, he improved his playmaking, he shouldered the burden of carrying a team through a period of transition and uncertainty, and never once shrank from the moment. For a long stretch of time, Pascal Siakam was the Toronto Raptors full stop, and that legacy is real. That legacy is earned, and it deserves to be acknowledged before we talk about anything else. But legacies in the NBA don't always end the way we want them to. And that is the uncomfortable reality sitting at the center of this entire conversation. So let's talk about where these rumors actually come from, because they didn't just appear out of nowhere, and I think it's important to trace the actual origin of this speculation rather than just treating it like noise. The conversation around a potential Siakam trade started gaining real traction at a point when the Raptors organization was clearly in the middle of a significant identity shift. There was a period where it became obvious that the roster around Siakam was not going to be built to compete for a championship anytime soon. And when that realization hit, when the gap between where Siakam was as a player and where the team was as a contender became undeniably obvious, the question that every smart analyst and every front office around the league started asking was simple: is the best path forward for both parties to separate? Is this a situation where Pascal Siakam's best chance to compete for another championship and the Raptors' best chance to build something sustainable are actually two different paths? And once you start asking that question seriously, the rumor mill takes on a life of its own. Here is the thing about being the best player on a rebuilding team. It is genuinely one of the hardest positions to be in professional basketball. You are good enough to demand winning, you deserve to be competing at the highest level, but the team around you is not yet ready to do that. And so every season becomes this uncomfortable tug of war between what you need as a competitor and what the organization needs as a building franchise. Siakam experienced this tension in a very real and very human way. He was asked to be the guy in a situation where being the guy meant losing more often than not. And that is hard. That wears on you, and the frustration that can build up in a situation like that is completely understandable, even if it is never officially acknowledged. Now let's talk about something that I think gets glossed over in most discussions about this situation, and that is the contract dimension. Because in the NBA, money is never separate from basketball decisions. It is always baked in, always. And when you are talking about a player of Siakam's caliber, the financial conversation is enormously complicated. The question of whether to extend a player, whether to let a contract play out, whether to trade a player while their value is at its peak, these are decisions that front offices agonize over. And the Raptors front office, led by Masai Ujiri and Bobby Webster, is one of the sharpest groups in the entire league. They don't make emotional decisions, they make strategic ones. And the strategic calculus around Siakam's contract situation, the timing, the value, the cap implications, absolutely played a role in how this situation developed. Think about it from the front office perspective. You have a star player whose market value is at a certain level. You have a roster that is in the early stages of a rebuild. You have a collection of draft picks and young talent that represents the future of your franchise. And you have to make a decision about whether holding on to your best player accelerates your path to contention or actually delays it. Because here is something that people don't always want to say out loud. Sometimes the best player on a rebuilding team actually slows the rebuild down, not because they're doing anything wrong, but because their presence changes the perception of where you are as a team. It changes the decisions you make in free agency and the draft, and it creates expectations that aren't yet justified by the reality of your roster. It is a paradox, and the Raptors have had to stare directly at that paradox with Siakam. And now let's have the honest conversation about team chemistry and dynamics, because this part of the story always gets whispered about but never properly addressed. When a team is struggling, and the Raptors have had their share of struggles during this transitional period, there is always friction. There is always tension between individual goals and team results. There is always a moment where a player looks around the locker room and wonders if this is the right situation for him. I'm not saying Siakam was unhappy. I'm not saying there were explosive confrontations or anything dramatic like that. What I am saying is that the human reality of being a competitive, championship caliber player on a team that is not yet championship caliber creates a psychological weight that is real and undeniable. And the people running this organization are smart enough to recognize that weight and have honest conversations about what it means for everyone involved. Now, here is the part of this conversation that I think should genuinely excite Raptors fans, even in the middle of all this uncertainty. If Siakam does move on, whether through trade or any other avenue, what comes back to Toronto has the potential to be franchise-altering. A player of his caliber, a proven all-star with championship experience and a skill set that translates across multiple systems, commands enormous value on the trade market. We are talking about the kind of return that could supercharge this rebuild in a massive way. Multiple first-round picks, young players with real upside, assets that accelerate everything the Raptors are trying to build. And when you pair that kind of return with the existing young core, Scotty Barnes, the emerging pieces, the draft assets already in the building, you start to see a really compelling picture of what this franchise could look like in 3 to 4 years. And let's be real about where Siakam would land if this all plays out, because this is also part of the conversation. There is no shortage of teams that would line up for a player with his profile. Versatile forwards who can score from multiple levels, defend across positions, and handle the pressure of being a number 1 or number 2 option are extremely valuable in today's NBA. Contending teams would see him as the final piece. Teams in the middle of their own rebuild might see him as the cornerstone to build around. Either way, Pascal Siakam is going to land somewhere, and he is going to land well. His career is not over. His relevance is not diminishing. He is going to go somewhere and continue to be a problem for opposing defenses for years to come. But here is the truth that sits underneath all of the rumors and all of the speculation. This situation is not really just about Pascal Siakam. It never was. It is about the Toronto Raptors deciding clearly, definitively, without any ambiguity, what they want to be. It is about an organization that has already proven it can build a champion, making the call about how to build the next one. The 2019 championship did not happen by accident. It happened because Masai Ujiri made a bold, painful, controversial decision to trade a franchise icon in DeMar DeRozan and bet everything on a rental superstar, and it worked. It worked in the most incredible way imaginable, and now the organization is once again at a point where bold decisions need to be made, where the comfortable path and the correct path are not necessarily the same thing, where sentimentality has to take a backseat to strategy. The Raptors are not a team that repeats its mistakes. They learn, they adapt, they make moves that the rest of the league doesn't see coming. And whatever happens with Pascal Siakam, whether he is here next season or whether he is wearing a different jersey, you can trust that this front office has a plan, a real plan, not a hope, not a vibe, an actual strategic vision for where this franchise is going and how they are going to get there. So here is where I want to leave you, and then I want to hear from you. Pascal Siakam's legacy in Toronto is already secured. Nothing changes that. The 2019 championship banner hangs forever. The memories are permanent. The love this city has for him is real and it is earned, but the next chapter of this franchise is being written right now. And the decisions made in the coming months about Siakam, about the roster, about the direction of this rebuild are going to echo for the next decade. And I want to know what you think the right call is. Do you hold on to Siakam and bet on the rebuild catching up to him? Or do you make the move, get the return, and use those assets to build something entirely new? Drop your answer in the comments right now, because this conversation is one of the most important ones the Raptors community needs to be having. And I promise you we are going to keep covering every single development on this story as it unfolds.